There is one thing that Saltburn does better than any other film. Foreshadowing. Let's talk about it.
Suddenly, the world I used to know, I see it differently. You woke me from a dream, now here's reality.
It seems that we humans are constantly in search of meaning, even to the point of seeing meaning in things where it does not intentionally exist. And I think it's the same with film. So what is foreshadowing? Foreshadowing means that you're hinting early on in a story about what is to come during the later stages of the film. And this might create expectations about how things can play out as the film progresses. Now there are two different types of foreshadowing, which is direct foreshadowing and indirect foreshadowing. So to show you what I mean, it is very fitting that I just received this in the mail. In Barbie, we see an example of indirect foreshadowing, and when it comes to indirect foreshadowing, this can just be a subtle hint of what's to come. It can be shown as something a character says, what someone in the background is wearing, or just a symbol that is reoccurring. It can also be repeated colors throughout a film. For example, there might be some specific symbolism in the color red or blue. And when it comes to Barbie, eagle-eyed viewers have captured this blink or you'll miss it moment where Barbie drives by the cinema in Barbieland, and on the side of the entrance we see two posters of the Wizard of Oz, which can be interpreted as that she's on a reverse journey compared to Dorothy. Where in The Wiz, Dorothy leaves the grey real world and travels to the colourful world of Oz, whereas Margot Robbie travels from the fantastical world of Barbieland into the realities of the real world. We also see the subtle hint of driving down a pink brick road when the characters are leaving and arriving to Barbieland, similar to the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz. Interesting fact though is that Emerald Fennell, the director of Saltburn, is actually in Barbie, playing the discontinued pregnant next door neighbor Midge. Now when it comes to direct foreshadowing though, it's, as the name implies, much more direct. It can be a voiceover stating something that will happen later in the film, or a character saying something that they will do later on. Or in the case of the much underseen but brilliant comedy Family, which starts with a classic "How did I end up here" voiceover.
This is me. I'm a senior level VP at a hedge fund in New Jersey. I like Beyonce and a frisky Pinot Noir. I don't belong at this place, I belong at the Admirals Club at JFK. So, how exactly did I wind up here? And why am I wearing open-toed shoes at this nightmare carnival? Because I was trying to do something nice for once.
But seriously, only 5,000 people have logged Family on Letterboxd, so just go watch Family, make this your next watch. Now another example of direct foreshadowing is the beginning of Stand By Me, where Richard Dreyfuss' character, the writer, also he in a voiceover says, I was 12, going on 13.
The first time I saw a dead human being. It happened in the summer of 1959, a long time ago. But only if you measure in terms of years. I was living in a small town in Oregon called Castle Rock. There were only 1,281 people, but to me it was the whole world.
Anyway, this is direct foreshadowing since he tells us that we're basically waiting to see a dead body sometime during the summer. Now what does all of this have to do with Saltburn, you might ask? Well, Saltburn is packed with foreshadowing, mythology, symbolism, and Easter eggs. And as director Emerald Fennell mentioned in an interview with Backstage magazine, there's nothing more fun than these little kinds of portents. We're talking the gothic genre here. It's all about little signs and signals. This video is of course full of spoilers and is directed toward people that have already seen the film, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on each scene. So let's get into it. Let's start with one of the most mentioned foreshadowing examples in Saltburn, the rock that doesn't land in the river. In this scene, Felix tells Oliver about a tradition they have in their family where you throw a rock with the name of a deceased person on it into the river. But when Oliver throws the rock that says Dad on it, it lands on the bank of the river in a pile of vomit. Anyway, here I completely misinterpreted it and I suspected that it missed the river and landed in the pile of vomit because his dad was a drunk and not because he was still alive. On to the next case of foreshadowing in the scene where Oliver has breakfast with the family and they start discussing the British poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Venetia tells the story of his housekeeper who saw Percy walking past a window before realizing that he was in Italy at that time, and a few hours later, he drowned. And here when the camera cuts to Venetia, you can see Felix walking by the window behind her, his doppelganger, which indicates that Felix will die later in the film. Fennell says, I would estimate 1 in 30 people notice it. It's not really designed for people to see it. We took a gamble because really what we don't want is people to see it. It's one of those things that was on purpose, but hopefully in a more subliminal way. There are also some moments in this film that aren't necessarily foreshadowing, but there are some fun fan theories that I came across whilst researching for this video. And I did read a theory that it might be possible that Oliver is memorizing the maze in the scene where he's standing by the window looking out onto the maze, and the butler sneaks up on him. I had to re-watch this scene to see if there are any hints to it, and yes, he is kind of playing a bit with the marbles in the model of the maze, but that could also just be a hint for what's to come and that the maze will have a role to play later on. Next up, we have the scene of Felix and Oliver singing along to Mr. Brightside by the Killers whilst driving to Oliver's parents' home. This is a song about insecurity and jealousy in a relationship, which fittingly matches the relationship between the two that is just about to get exposed in the big twist in the film. And it's a very short and not very noticeable cue since it's only on screen for about 3 seconds and you can barely make out what they're singing. Fennell has mentioned though that it was a very pricey 3 seconds. Now over to the crescendo of the film, when Felix unfortunately has been killed in the maze and the family and Oliver and Farley has gathered in the dining room for an awkward lunch where they try to pretend that everything is normal. Here Venetia is overfilling her glass with red wine, spilling out onto the table in the red-soaked room. She then starts drinking it, spilling it out all over her top, mirroring her own death scene when she is found laying in a bathtub filled with her own blood just 10 minutes later. There's also a very quick cut to Elspeth choking on her food or something. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on, but this would suggest another case of mirroring. This time of her death later in the film when Oliver pulls the endotracheal tube out from Elspeth's mouth and in the process slowly killing her. I don't know, is that a stretch, is it? Because let's remember, not all foreshadowing is intentional. The audience dissect and analyze films and find meanings in songs and mise-en-scène that is completely unintentional by the director, but can still lend meaning to something that happens later in the film. And we have probably done that here, found elements of this film that the director did not intend to use as foreshadowing, but we think that it is. Like there's a whole documentary on the symbolism and interpretations of The Shining, and I don't think that this devalues the film, it rather elevates it because I think that film analysis and discourse is important and most of all it's fun. There is also one last scene I would like to talk about, and that is the scene in the first half of the film when Oliver first arrives to Saltburn and meets the Cattons, and Elspeth says to her son whilst turning to Oliver, "Oh darling, but you're kind about everyone, you can't be trusted." And right when she says you can't be trusted, she's looking straight into Oliver's eyes, as if she's saying it to him, foreshadowing his scheming nature and that we in the end can't trust him. She was right.
Oh, but darling, you're kind about everyone, you can't be trusted.
Now I think that's it for my input on foreshadowing. Now let me know if there are any other types of foreshadowing, hints, Easter eggs, mythological meanings that you noticed in Saltburn. And thank you for watching, and let me know what you would like me to cover in my next video. And don't forget to subscribe. Now I'm off to watch more films. Foreshadowing.